to Real and Rooted. My name is Zarita, and I'm so excited that you decided to join me today. If you have not already watched or listened to my introduction video, I want to encourage you to go back and do so. Please make sure you hit like, subscribe, and share. Thank you. So, today I am going to be talking about daddy issues, and I am going to be highlighting my healing journey. In both my graduate and undergraduate programs, I majored in social and behavioral sciences. So during my studies, I had to read a lot of theories and study a lot of theorists. And in my studies, I recall reading about something called the father complex. The father complex has evolved into attachment theory and attachment trauma, which also closely relates to what people now call father wounds. I refer to them as daddy issues. It is all the same. They all talk about the same causes and manifestations. So, according to research, when a child grows up without the presence of a caring, loving, emotionally, and physically available father, or even grow up in a home with an abusive father, it leaves them with long term emotional and psychological issues. Those issues, unresolved, can cause a child to struggle in life. Some of the things that studies have shown that children can struggle with well into adulthood is things like low self esteem, difficulty forming healthy relationships, early and unhealthy sexual behaviors, struggling with anxiety and depression, consistently seeking validation from people, emotional mismanagement, abandonment issues, and the list goes on. I have struggled with quite a few of those in my lifetime. I did not recognize it until later in life. I think all the way up until and even through my undergrad program, even while I was studying lots of these theories and theorists, I still did not associate some of my behaviors with these concepts. I had held on to the idea that because I felt like I had such a great childhood in my mind, and a lot of that was due to my mom. I think that she did such a great job affirming me that I really did not feel like I had any issues related to my father not being there. I thought I was fine. It wasn't until much later in life that I began to fully recognize how a lot of my behaviors, my choices, and even my struggles were very likely linked to my daddy issues. So I'll give you a little bit of my backstory. I was adopted into my family. I was adopted as a newborn, so my parents are the only parents I've ever known. At the time of my adoption, my mother was 42 and my father was 38. They had been married for several years, and my mother could not conceive. So they decided to adopt. Now, my father already had 3 children from a previous marriage, and my mother had 1 son from her previous marriage. They were both in their second marriage. So there were 5 of us when I came along in our blended family. Ironically enough, I really grew up like an only child. That was probably because of the age gap. My brother, who was in the home when I was brought into the home, was already 19 years older than me. So by the time I got to the age where I could really remember anything, I did not have him around very much longer. And my half siblings, my father's children, were never around. I did not grow up with them at all. Although my mother did tell me that when I was a baby, they were coming around more frequently, but an incident happened and they just stopped coming around after that. My father was tall, dark, and handsome. He had an amazing smile. He was very charming. He was very well dressed, very well spoken. I thought that he was just wonderful. I adored him. And so did my mother. I always saw my mother being so loving and affectionate toward him. I saw my mother really treat him like the king of our castle. So I followed that model as much as a young daughter could. I remember as a young girl, I would stand in the window watching for my dad to come home so that I could make sure that I went and grabbed his slippers and put them by the front door for him. That had become our routine. So when he would come through the front doors, his slippers would be waiting for him. And so would I with open arms. I would always grab him around his legs and give him a big hug and let him know that I was glad that he came home. I was happy to see him. When he was away from home, I would just sit at his desk and look at his things. That's where he kept most of his things, and it made me feel close to him. My father smoked a pipe, and his tobacco that went in his pipe was sweet. It had a sweet smell to it, and that mixed with his cologne would always be the aroma that was his desk. So his jacket would be hanging there, his leather jacket, and it would smell like him. Everything on his desk would smell like him. So I would sit there and just look at things. I wasn't allowed to touch them, but I would look at them and think of him and wait for him to come home. I think that my affections toward my father was the same as any little girl. Naturally, we're drawn to and captivated by our fathers. As young girls, we admire them just because they're our fathers. And so that's how I felt about my dad. He was wonderful in my eyes, and I tried to make sure he understood his importance to me. The problem is my father never reciprocated the love and affection that I showed him. Those times that I would run up to him and wrap my arms around him and yell out his name, I never recall my father picking me up and giving me a big hug or a big kiss on the forehead or the cheek. I never recall my father having any enthusiasm to see me. He never laid in my room and read me a book. He never asked me how my day was, told me that I was pretty, that I looked cute. He never showed me any affection that little girls long for from their father. In fact, my father, well, I'll say I never recall my father ever saying, I love you. The one thing I do recall my father doing periodically is maybe patting me on the top of my head. Maybe that was his way of showing a little affection. And I remember one time he told me that my mustache was getting as thick as his. Well, I feel like my father was saying it in jest, but it made me very self-conscious for a very long time. As a kid, I would consistently go and look in the mirror to see if I was getting a mustache because I was a little girl. I didn't want a mustache. I didn't wanna look like my dad, not in that way. So that was the beginning of my very complicated, turned non-existent relationship with my father, and quite possibly the beginning of my daddy issues. When I was about 6 years old, my father left my mother for the lady across the street. Yes, our actual neighbor. And eventually, he secretly divorced my mother. I say secretly because he used a method called service by publication. And that method was primarily used when the plaintiff could not locate the defendant to serve them papers. It was supposed to be used as a last resort after all other methods have had been exhausted. My father took out an advertisement in the newspaper as a means of seeking a divorce from my mother. And so when my mother did not respond to it, it created a loophole for the courts to grant him a divorce from her. It's interesting that my father chose this method because clearly my mother was not missing. My father knew exactly where she was. I'm not sure why my father chose this method. I don't know if it was out of fear that she would not divorce him. I don't know if it was out of fear that he would have child support. I don't know. After my father left, I can count on 2 fingers the number of times I saw him. And those times were always in passing. He would come in and he would leave almost as quickly as he arrived. He was always in a hurry and he barely spoke. So I spent the majority of my childhood without the love, support, and protection of my father. I did have an uncle on my mother's side, and my uncle was a very good uncle to me, but he never stepped into the role of a father. But I did appreciate the things that my uncle did do for me as a child. There were many times during my childhood when I wondered if my father ever really wanted to adopt. I know that my mother always wanted a large family, but my father, being an only child, I don't know if he wanted more children. I think maybe he chose to go along with what my mother wanted because he felt like he was in love with her or something at the time. Now, that's just my theory because my father never confirmed or denied any of this. But I say that because my father never not only did he never foster a relationship with me, he never fostered a relationship with his own biological children. My father and his 3 children became estranged. They just stopped talking to him altogether. When I was about 11 years old, I was really starting to feel the effects of my father's absence. I was also starting to go through puberty, so I was feeling and having all of the emotions. I remember crying and being angry and then being sad and all the things. During one of my episodes, I went to my mother and I was pleading with her to try her best to somehow connect with my father to see if he would be willing to spend some time with me. I'm 11 years old begging for my mom to beg him to spend time with me. My mother, being one of the most compassionate women I have ever known, went to work, trying her best to appeal to him. And somehow She seemed to have gotten through to him. My father agreed to let me spend the weekend with him at his new girlfriend's house. By this time, my father was on his 3rd divorce. He had divorced the 3rd wife. So when my mom told me about his agreement, I was so excited. I was very hopeful and I had a lot of anticipation. I really needed to see my father. Leading up to the weekend, my mother sat me down. She had a conversation with me about how to conduct myself around my father and his girlfriend, about being respectful, about minding my manners, etc., etc. And then the day came and my mother, she had helped me pack. She gave me instructions. She gave me bus fare. She walked me to the bus. She gave me a big hug. She had already prayed over me. She loved on me and she sent me on my way. It would take 2 buses, 2 city buses, this is public transportation that I'm on, to get to my dad's girlfriend's house. And I had the instructions. I felt confident. And as I sat on that first bus, I just sat there thinking excitedly about seeing my father and talking with him, spending time with him, loving on him, and hopefully having him love on me, trying to rekindle and rebuild a relationship with my father. I realize some people are probably saying, why would an 11-year-old be on public transportation? Well, I grew up in the big city and I grew up in the 70s and the 80s. We started early taking public transportation. We started early doing lots of things. We walk places, we take public transportation, all the things. And my mother did have a car at the time, but I really cannot recall why she did not drive me. But I was fine. I did not have any problems with it, and my mother clearly didn't have any problems with it either. So, after a while, I arrived at my dad's girlfriend's house, and she was very kind, she was very welcoming. I thought she was a very nice lady. My father wasn't there, but she told me that she had spoken with him and that he would be in later. In the meantime, she and I sat around talking, and I learned that they had not been together very long and that she did not have any children. She met him on his job, and she seemed to care a lot about my father. But after a while, I was not interested in talking with her anymore. I really wanted to see my father. After a while, it was my bedtime, and I was a bit disappointed because I really wanted to see my dad. That was the whole purpose of my trip, right? But his girlfriend told me that she felt like he would be in much later than we had anticipated and that I should probably just go to bed. And she assured me that I would see him in the morning. So I went to bed, and the next morning I woke up and lo and behold, my father still was not there. I walked into the kitchen and his girlfriend was sitting at the kitchen table with what looked like orange juice. And she asked me if I wanted some breakfast. And I asked her where my father was. And she told me that he had come in the middle of the night while I was sleeping, but he had to leave before I woke up. So I was pretty sad. I was wondering when he would be back. And she then told me that she did not know what was going on with my father and that she didn't know if they were even going to continue in a relationship. And she told me that she was so sorry, but she was going to have to send me home. Well, as you can imagine, I was deflated. But I finished my breakfast and I brushed my teeth, washed my face, all the things, got dressed, and she didn't rush me out. So I took my time because I really felt like the longer it took me, maybe he would just show up and I could see him. But he didn't. So after a while, I was ready to leave and head back home. And she again told me how sorry she was. And she told me she had spoken with my mother, and my mother was expecting me. So I gathered my things and I thanked her and I headed home. Just like that, my hopes for a wonderful weekend with my father turned into a very disappointing overnight stay with his new girlfriend. So my journey home turned into one of the most unforgettable experiences of my life.